Welcome to the Being Resilient podcast with your host, Stephanie Olson. Hi, I'm Stephanie Olson, and welcome to Being Resilient podcast. I am so excited because I have Yolanda Harden with us today, and I know Yolanda really well because I get to work with her every day, but I'm excited for you to hear all about her story and get to know her almost as well as I do. So let me just share a little bit about her. Yolanda Harden joined the fight against human trafficking in 2017 in Iowa while working directly with youth services, foster youth, and child abuse prevention. Her life experience and personal passion have consistently served underprivileged youth and those involved with the human services or juvenile justice systems. After learning of human trafficking and its effects on today's youth and adults, Yolanda shifted her career specifically to human trafficking prevention education for all children, so that one day there will be no new victims. Yolanda leads all things education as the Director of Operations and Programming for the Set Me Free project. Her objective is to educate what human trafficking is and make others aware that it happens in our community. Her main priority is preventing these heinous crimes before traffickers ever have the chance. Yolanda continues to show her dedication to meeting students where they're at and engaging them, including her staff, in strength-based life lessons that build each youth up and encourage them to advocate for one another. So welcome, Yolanda. I'm so glad you're here.
Thank you, Stephanie.
I'm glad I didn't have to twist your arm too much to be on the show. I appreciate it.
Just a little bit, not too much.
Good, thank you. So you have quite a story. I want to talk a little bit. I mean, when I started this podcast and started the idea between resilience in life and leadership and turning trauma into triumph, truly you're one of the first persons I thought about, because that is the story of your life. You have really turned your trauma into triumph. So why don't you share a little bit about your story and what that looks like?
Are we like an 8-hour program, or
yes, you have
how long are you wanting us to go?
Yeah, absolutely. Go for it.
So I do have quite a story. And before I even say any of it, one of the things that I want to, really talk about is that my story is much more common than a lot of people think about or realize, especially my childhood. So I'll just do this kind of in a nutshell so we can get to, some of the good stuff later. But, I absolutely born and raised in a family that had, substance misuse, issues, mental health concerns. There's just a lot of things that were going on. A lot of physical abuse in my house, a lot of verbal and emotional abuse. That's probably the worst of all of it. But I also experienced sexual abuse, and that is fairly common throughout my family tree as well. And yeah, there were just a lot of things. By the age, I never get this quite right. I really have to go back and look at my timeline, but I want to say it was by age 11, I was in foster care, or at least started the process or the transition into the foster care system. There was quite a while there where my mother was trying to figure out if she could do it, or if she needed some extra support, if she was going to complete the classes she needed to complete in order to get us back. And so we spent a lot of time in and out of different shelters, whether they were, emergency services shelters, such youth shelters, or if we spent some time in domestic violence shelters, homeless shelters, really kind of made the rounds in that, in my hometown, as far as those kinds of services. And then eventually I did go into foster care. Went into my first foster home, I believe it was just after my 13th birthday. So I was at age 14 at that time. And it was really very, very difficult. There was about 2 to 3 years there that were just hard. There was violence, to the point of guns being shot off at the kids, and just there was just so much going on. And then, like I said, in and out of the shelters, and then finally landed in foster home and in a foster home. So when I went into foster care, I actually went for a couple of different foster homes, and there was a few reasons why that happened as well. And I aged out of the system, actually 18 years old, and left the foster care system. And the things that they say about foster kids and black trash bags, and that sort of thing is all really, it's very, very true. Moving house to house and not really ever feeling a part of a family, that was my experience. I was fortunate in the way that I didn't have any severe abuse or traumas come from the foster homes themselves. But I was lost, and I was angry, and I was trying to figure out who I was and where I belong, and what I was worth. I was just trying to figure out a lot of those things. And so that caused a lot of, struggles in that. So I aged out at 18, began my adult life, and just clawed my way through life from that point.
So I can only imagine, because I talk a lot about abandonment. I can only imagine what that abandonment must have felt like, because you had a mom who was aroundish, right? I mean, she wasn't in prison. She didn't pass away. I mean, she was there and put you into foster care. How do you deal with something that traumatic?
I don't know if I know how. I mean, you just wake up and you move through life. It was very traumatic. And I would say, out of all the things that kind of follow me, the trauma that I've had throughout my life, and what follows me the most is that piece right there. It is that feeling of being left, and nobody really ever coming back to get us out of shelter. We had family that just wouldn't come and get us. There was a couple who tried, and there were reasons. I mean, we had some family that was just too young to come and get us, and then there was a lot of reasons why people couldn't get us, and there was a lot of reasons why people wouldn't come get us, maybe from their own stuff. But I vividly remember one evening while I was sitting in the kids' shelter, and I had gotten my tray for supper and went down to the little cafeteria and for my supper in the kids' shelter, which a little cafeteria is a little room, but had went down there, and like somewhere before that night or before that dinner, I had realized nobody wants me, and nobody cares, and nobody loves me. And I cried, and I cried this emotion of I just didn't fit. I just didn't belong. I just wasn't good enough. And I like the realization hit me, and I just cried for hours and hours and hours. And I haven't really recovered from that. I've done some work. I'm on the journey, the healing journey, but it still creeps up on a pretty regular basis. And that's probably the thing that I feel the most in all aspects of my life is I get very sensitive when I'm close to somebody and there's any thought or threat or concern about them leaving. I get very sensitive with that. When I have kids now who are out of the house, and I'm an empty nester, but when they left to go, there certainly is some, that's hard for any parent, but there was some real trauma being triggered
Right.
in that leaving and not wanting, just feeling like that was it. They're gone, and it's one more person who's left my life. And so it definitely triggers. I definitely, that's the thing that bothers me the most, even still. But yeah.
Wow. And you talked about 11 through 13 and some of those ages. I think middle school in and of itself is a
Oh,
traumatic time. It's a
yes.
time when I don't think anybody likes their time in middle school. So I can't even imagine how difficult that must have been navigating that with the abandonment issues and not having a support system. What did that look like?
Well, um, I really did not know who I was. Up until that point in my life, I was my older brother's shadow. I really didn't have my own personality. I was everything. I followed him, I had been him. And so it wasn't until middle school that we had been separated. Some of it had to do with he moved in with my dad, or our dad. And then there was another time when we were just in different schools because of our ages. And then there was the split with the family and going into foster care. We did not get placed together. So there were a few times we were in and out of each other's lives in that way during those years as well. And so I really had to figure out who I was,
Yeah.
and trying to figure that out and navigating the the meanness that happens in middle school
Yeah.
in any way, shape, and form. It was really rough, and I had no sense of my own self-worth. I really I always say, that the first thing if I'm in therapy, first thing that we talk about is, self-worth. And I'm like, I don't know what that
What is
is. What
that?
is
Yeah.
that? Yeah. And probably the reason I'm an overachiever today is because it's never enough, and I never feel like it's good enough. And I want to make sure that everybody knows I'm enough. Middle school was rough. I did start partying, uh, got into, drinking, got into some drugs and things like that, and was hanging out with people who were much older than me, doing much older adult things than I should have been doing. And um, I joined them and all of that, and just really kind of floated
Right.
through that period. I don't honestly even have a lot of memory of my middle school years. It's very choppy. And the pieces that I do remember are a very traumatic event that happened. Like I remember leaving the shelter without my brother and being placed and not even being able to say goodbye to my brother. So
Oh,
it's like choppy trauma memories
yeah.
that I have of middle school. It's not until high school that I start kind of remembering how I was doing and how I was handling things.
Wow. Interesting. Yeah. I think about, and I kind of want to talk a little bit about the foster care system a little bit later, but when when you're talking about your story, the thing that comes to my mind is, well, of course you started drinking. Of course you started doing drugs. Of course you started hanging around, an older crowd. And that's the first thing that comes to my mind. But I think sometimes when we see kiddos in those situations, that's not our immediate thought, or not
Right,
everybody's immediate thought. So
right.
speak to that a little bit about that
Ooh,
responsibility that we have as safe adults, for example.
you are hitting on a very, very touchy topic here. Um, you might know that about me, Stephanie.
Hmm. Hmm.
So yeah, so very, very, very touchy topic, but I think it's a very important topic. And I get really passionate about this because um, you know, it's very easy to look at an individual at whatever age and say, that's a problem kid, or that is like, yeah, that kid's never going to amount to anything, or going to grow up to be just like their parents, or all of these things that society says as a whole. And I was every bit of, not going to amount to anything, troubled kid, like, just, like, I was all the stereotypes, and I
All the
haven't even,
labels.
yeah, all the labels. Thank you. And I haven't even touched on the fact that I ended up pregnant at an early age, and we can definitely talk about that. But, I was all of those. And, we were dumpster divers, and I was living out of, we were getting our clothes and stuff like that. I mean, like, thrift stores were too good for us. We weren't able, to do that. And so, I mean, we didn't have our water and electricity on half the time, and things like that. There's no reason anybody would have ever believed in me, or should have ever believed in me. And by my thinking at that time.
Right.
Not what I think now, but and then, what I want people to realize more is that, yeah, did I have a decision in partying? Did I have a decision in the crowds? Absolutely I did. And I make no excuses for that. And also, but and also, that's what I knew.
Right.
That's what my life, that's the path my life put me on. And so for me to make good decisions, I didn't even know that there was another option.
Them, right.
I wouldn't even fathom that. What do you mean that when you're, 12, you're not smoking cigarettes already? What do you mean that, you're not partying? Doesn't everybody do this? That's everybody I was around. I had no idea. And so, I did make those decisions, and I did do those things. But as I got older, and for a very long time there, it wasn't until I had my son that between the time that I went into foster care and started that whole journey at, 11, I mean, there's a whole bunch more stuff before that, but really started that transition into foster care at about 11-ish. From that point until the time that I had my son, I had no goals. I didn't believe that I was going to amount to anything as an adult. And so I was just wasting time, just floating by, just doing whatever the day brought, with no intention of whatever. And so, of course, people would think negatively about me. And of course, people would think that I'm wasting time, because I was, right? And then my son was born. And it wasn't that he was born that changed me. It was that I had somebody else that I couldn't dream for myself. I couldn't have hopes for myself. I couldn't believe in myself. I didn't have any of my own self-worth. But that baby, that little life that I had, deserved far more than I ever received myself, or deserved far more than I ever treated myself, and than how I treated myself. And so it was at that point that it was like, and it wasn't even me talking it out and saying it now is even a bigger thought than I had at the time. It was just more innate. It was more just this feeling, not a thought, but just this feeling of, he deserves better and he deserves more. And so I go through, starting to fix my life and kind of prepare that. And then I look back at my life now, and I think, now, if somebody had believed in me, what would I have become? Because I'm such a hard worker. I am so deliberate about the things that I do. I'm very intentional. And I think that I've really become a halfway decent human being. So maybe I could have been a fully decent human being had somebody believed in me. I don't know, but and so I look at kids sometimes in the work that we do, and I see people writing them off, and I just think, you have no idea.
Right.
You have no idea. I can see this thing right here that this kid has, and that thing right there, that's the thing that's going to pull them through. But they
Right.
need to know that they have it. And if you don't think they have it, they may never know.
Exactly.
Somebody has to help. So I don't know. I can get I can get really, really hot on that topic, very uprooted in that.
I
But
love, well, clearly, really critical in who you have become today. And I think sometimes we forget that we can either plant seeds that will help build a harvest, or we can just unroot them. And so we have a lot of power in those kids' lives that we don't even realize that we
yeah.
have.
Yeah, you're exactly right. You're calling it a harvest and planting those seeds, and I call it nudges, but it's the
Right.
same thing. Like, I didn't need somebody to make the decisions for me, but I did need somebody when I was at that fork in the road to just kind of go,
Yep.
that's it. You don't have to lecture me. You don't have to make a big deal about it. You don't have to make the
Right.
decision. I just need you to nudge me in the
Right. Yeah,
go
and
this
for
way.
those who are just listening, she's just nodding her head like to the right, like we do, we nudge that way. But that is exactly it. And I personally am so glad that there were those nudges in your life, and we can talk about just that connection we have later. But one of the things that it occurs to me is you had this experience where you didn't feel worth, you didn't feel loved, you didn't feel accepted. And then when you had your son, you had the opportunity to, okay, that's not what you got from your parents, but now you have the opportunity to give that to your son. And it's just those little choices that we make that can change everything.
It really is. And I'm so glad that you picked up on that, because one of the things that I cannot explain is that moment.
Mm,
And I turned that over to the good Lord. Before my son was born, I did not believe that I was going to keep him. I
mm,
believed that he was going to go with his father. And up until the time that I was in the hospital getting ready to have him, or maybe it was even right after I had him, I can't remember, but my older brother came in and tied a bracelet on my ankle and said, you always make good decision. You always make good decisions under pressure, tough decisions
wow.
under pressure. I don't remember how he worded it at that time, because I was worried about what
Yeah.
I was going to do. And in the hospital is when I decided to keep him. Otherwise, he was supposed to go with his father. And it was not because I believed in me. I didn't feel
Right.
like I could do it. I just felt like he deserved it, and I was the only one who could do that.
Right.
That's God. That was completely God saying, I've got you. I'm going to carry you through this. And God really, truly, he knew that I needed that. And he knew that I would trust him kind of blindly in that.
Love that.
And um, he made that happen.
That
I
is,
have no explanation otherwise.
I love that. I think it's such a beautiful story, and it's such a difficult story. And I loved early on you said you clawed your way out.
Mm,
And I almost have this picture in my mind, you with your son, kind of on your back. I mean, this is just this vision that I get, and you're just clawing out for the both of you. And I
mm.
love, I don't know if that's kind of where
That
you
feel
felt, but yeah.
it feels like that's been my life and
Hmm.
it still is my life. Now it's calmed down,
Right.
right? I'm not clawing quite as much, but there are days when I still feel like that. But yeah, absolutely. I definitely, yeah. And it was not for me. It wasn't until, I mean, truly, I had to, it wasn't that long ago, a couple months ago that, I'm very open that I go to therapy. I believe in mental
Therapy is a
health. I
good
think
thing.
everybody should go to therapy. Please go to therapy. Okay. If you need it, go to therapy.
Yes.
Even if you think you need it or think you might want to, just go to therapy. So it was a few months ago, and I was working with my therapist on something, and asked me the first time that I felt like I had worth.
Wow.
I don't have an answer, right? Like I just don't. I don't have an answer. And so, and that was the same throughout all that, because everything that I did in those early years, every single bit of it was for my son. It was for him to not live that. Now, I'm going to make it really clear here because I don't want anybody to ever misunderstand anything. I was not perfect.
Right.
And I made plenty of mistakes throughout that whole process, and continued to make mistakes my entire adult life, as we all do, because we
Yes.
are all human.
Yes.
So I wasn't perfect, and I made a lot of mistakes there, but somehow I just made enough right decisions to keep me going in the right direction, and and for him. And so when my therapist asked me that, I'm like, I'm not sure that I believe I have worth now,
Hmm.
but I don't believe I've ever taught myself that I do. My worth comes out of what I can do for others, as well, what I did for my child, what I did for, and I'm such a caretaker role in that way, that it's always like I feel better when I'm doing for others. If I have 5 minutes alone and I need to do something for myself, I don't know how to take care of me. I
Yeah.
don't know what to do for me.
I think sometimes people need those external things to really get to that next step, and some of us are more internal, and it can kind of go back and forth. But what you're describing is, I mean, this podcast is called Being Resilient. What you're describing is resilience to me, because a lot of people, when they think about um, resilience, I think there's this idea that it's about arriving. I
Mm.
made it through and here I am. And I just love that you talk about, I'm not perfect. I still make mistakes. I'm even as an adult, because we're human. But don't you think that's what resilience is? 2 steps forward, 2 steps back.
So I really, really appreciate you coming, you mentioning this. And I don't think that you and I have ever talked about this, but there was a period when I hated the word resilient. I had been labeled, and I used labeled lightly there because it was meant to be a positive thing. So there was one time when there was, somebody who actually told me that you have the big R on your chest. You are resilient, written all over you. And I know that they meant that well, or they
Right.
meant that in a very positive way. And at first I took that and I loved it. I was like, yes, I am. I am resilient, right? And then after a while, I kind of got to the point where it was doing something to me mentally,
Mm,
that I began to feel like I was hiding my mistakes so that I could be perfect, so that I could keep the label resilient, right? And then it became now this burden to
wow.
be resilient, because I had that impression of resilience meant you had arrived.
Wow.
And so I went through a period there where it was like, I'm tired of hearing that. I don't even want anybody to say that to me. And so I had been doing some speaking at the time and telling my story at the time. And I stopped telling my story, and I stopped telling it for a couple of reasons, some other bigger reasons. But one of the smaller reasons was I felt like I had to hide. I felt like I couldn't make mistakes. which was putting more pressure on me, which was causing more mistakes, and it started the cycle. And so I stopped speaking.
Wow.
And then it was a while later that I really had to finally come back around to appreciating what resilience means. And now I can own it because I know that it doesn't mean perfect. It's not equivalent to perfect. It just means that I can get up again. And so now I really do want, I like I said, I love that you bring it up. I really do want everybody to really understand that piece of it. Yeah. We are always going to make mistakes. And at no point, I don't care what motivational speaker it is, what celebrity it is, what, big successful CEO, guru, whatever, whoever it is that has arrived in whatever way, they still have stuff.
Right.
And we all still have stuff. And I will continue my journey of healing. I have not arrived. I will continue my journey of resilience and bouncing back and being able to get up, and, things will knock me down, or I'll take hit after hit. And I might have a day or a week where life kind of just sucks for a moment. And then I'll pull it together and get back on that horse and go back to battle and claw my way through whatever the next piece of this journey in life is.
Exactly. And I mean, and that is so true. And sometimes being resilient is, gosh, I took a shower by 3:00.
Yes. Yes.
It's gotta be, and it's gotta be giving yourself grace to get through those moments, because life is not easy at all. So talk to me a little bit about trauma and how trauma can impact the rest of your life. I mean, that's a loaded question right there, but you can put it in any snippet you would like.
How to put that in a snippet? Yeah. So for me, from my perspective, my trauma, there's this thing about, I wouldn't change my trauma for anything because it's made me who I am. And while I understand and can appreciate that viewpoint for some people, I don't feel that way. I feel a little bit more like the trauma was not okay. And that I choose to believe that I would have been this strong, independent person, this strong, resilient person, regardless.
Yeah.
I just had to work harder. I just had to, whatever the situation was. And so trauma now impacts my life in so many ways. I think, and on the positive and the maybe negative or more challenging side, right? Like on the one hand, I am very empathetic, and I can very much, I can see the kid in the classroom that I'm talking to that is not crying, is not really being, a disruption or having behavior issues, but I can see it and know this kid's got something that other people might normally miss. I can, relate to the kids in a level. I can also, because of the trauma, I've been able to really have a good judge of people in my hiring process, in my, friendships, in my who I let around my kids. I've got a pretty good feel for that. Again, not perfect. We all make mistakes in all of these things, but some of those things have been good. Because of trauma, I understand what others are going through. I understand the process. However, on the less positive side, the trauma is disruptive still in my life. And, I'm 40 years old, and the trauma that I had in those first 11 years of my life, think about that.
Yeah.
A quarter of my life, the first quarter of my life, is still impacting me all this time later. And that the things that come up, it's disruptive in the way of, I still don't believe that I'm worthy. I'm better at it, but it's not every day. It's not all the time. And I'm barely hanging on when I think I'm worthy.
Yeah.
And so that can get there, that is interfered with on a regular basis. Whether in the past it's been whether I didn't get the job or I didn't get the raise or um, my husband, happens to be across the store and is, asking the cashier, who happens to be a cute female, where to find something. And then, it pops up in all of these different ways.
All
And
the externalization.
yes,
Yeah.
yes. And this constant need to prove myself. And I'm very aware, I'm a workaholic. And I don't know if you've noticed that, Stephanie, but
Did not know that. Yes.
yeah. And and so, I know that on the one hand, like that's good because I'm an empty nester and I've got time on my hands and I have plenty of other things to do. So whether I'm working for my job, or if I'm working on a project, or I'm going camping and hiking, or I am always doing something. Yes, I do not sit still. And but I also know that that's coming from a place of, one, I can't be alone with my thoughts because of the trauma. And two, it's coming from a place of, the more that I can do, the more skills that I have, the more that I can, whatever, then I hike this many hikes, or, do this project and it's fabulous, then I'll get some kudos and, backpack pats, and that'll make me feel, like I'm good enough, I'm worthy enough. And so yeah, it lingers and it doesn't go away.
Right.
Yeah.
And that is so important for people to understand, because I think I think we all experience trauma to some shape or form.
Mhm.
But certainly not the same as everybody else. And I think sometimes when people look at other people who have experienced heavy and been really impacted by heavy trauma, they don't understand. Well, get over it. Come on, you're here now. What's the problem? And they don't understand that trauma can revisit us often, and often does, and sometimes when we're not even expecting it.
Yes,
Yeah.
absolutely. So for those who have maybe had smaller bits of trauma, and whatever that means to you, I do not compare trauma, as you experience trauma in the way in which you experience it, and it could be very different than mine. And on the outset, society might think that this is more trauma and this is less trauma, or whatever. But for those of you who may have had some smaller pieces, what you consider some smaller pieces of trauma or less traumatic events in your life, but you have had someone pass away and you've gone through the grief cycle, it's very similar to that. Yeah. It rears its ugly head at some of the strangest times, in the ways that you could never expect, in the ways in which you think that you're over it, you think that you've moved on, you think that you've healed from this, you think that you've passed the angry phase, that you've passed the sad phase, that you've passed the whatever phase, and then here it is again. And sometimes for what?
Yeah.
For what?
Wow.
Why? So I was in the store. I'm just going to talk about triggers real quick with this, because it's kind of reminding me of this. I was in the store, I want to say Sunday, and I was really triggered by a particular man in the store. I was at the auto parts store, I was picking up some windshield wiper blades, and this guy, just his eyes, only his eyes, looked exactly like somebody who had caused trauma to me in my life, in my younger years. And I had not ever been triggered or had ever really thought about those eyes ever before this.
Wow.
Since that event, it had never been anything like that, but his eyes were so exactly the same and his glasses were so exactly the same that I barely got through that transaction. Now, I'm the type that I will push myself through it, and so that hopefully I can make it less of a trigger. Um, but why?
Yeah.
30 years. Why? Why?
No rhyme or reason.
No
I
rhyme or reason.
love your analogy to grief because that really is so similar. Anybody who has lost somebody knows that there could be something. It could be a smell, it
Mhm.
could be a song, it could whatever it is. And boom, you're right back there. And I think that is an amazing way to explain it because people who have not experienced some of those traumatic events might not understand that, but that is a perfect explanation. So let's talk about resilience with children, because I think
Mhm.
there's one thing, when we're talking about adults being resilient, and we always assign resilience to I used to always hear the phrase, babies bounce. So you
Mhm.
can do whatever and they bounce and you're fine. But you talked about that first, the first 11 years of your life. And we know that trauma really impacts children uh, even before they can consciously recognize it because their brains are developing so quickly.
Mhm.
And that is such a really important piece. So, talk about the resilience of children.
Whew. So that's another hot button for me. Um, I I know most of the time when we use the term, oh, kids are resilient,
Mhm.
they'll bounce back, it'll be
Yeah,
fine. It's usually most of the time it's in things like, well, the kid skinned his knee riding the bike or whatever the situation is. In those cases, yes, kids are resilient. Their bodies can handle a little bit more than,
like
those of us
my
who
old body, if I fall down, it's going to hurt more than, yeah, exactly.
exactly. So that's what so in those ways, absolutely kids are resilient. And so, but sometimes we think about it in it sometimes we use that as an excuse for us adults to do the thing or to make ourselves feel better
That's right.
after we've made the mistake or did the thing. And so we say, oh, kids are resilient, don't worry about it, and you just kind of move on hoping that they have forgotten it.
Yeah,
And the reality is that's just not true.
right.
And you know they might seem resilient because in the moment they continue to eat their food. They don't shut down and cry all day long like I might do if I'm having a bad day and having one of my own anxiety or depressive episodes or whatever, and I shut down for a day. Kids are going to still get up and go play, and they're still
Yeah,
going to eat their food, and they're still going to do those things, and so it shows up differently.
yeah,
But the thing is that it does show up somewhere along the line.
right,
And some of that, so let me tie this back to how you started or how we started this conversation of being that kid.
right.
That's when that whole piece is starting to come in of the trauma that they felt in those early years or they experienced in those early years. They couldn't cope or manage it at that time. And so that is lasting. That is truly changing your DNA. It is truly changing your brain wiring. And there's evidence and research out there on
Right.
this. Please go look this up for
Yep.
anybody who's listening. This is not just me spewing random thoughts. There's real evidence behind the DNA change and the wiring of your brain because of the toxic trauma and the toxic stress that young children endure that then start to come up later. So if they've endured a house full of trauma that is yelling and violent and physical
Right.
and, all of these things, that has rewired their brain, they might be throwing cars, their little, Hot Wheels cars
Right.
at 4 years old. And then by 10 years old, they're fighting every kid on the playground or flipping over desks in high school or whatever, because that is what they have experienced. Their brain has been rewired to this yelling and this violence and this level of expression,
Yes. Yeah.
and that's what they're taught and trained to do. Kids are not as resilient as we think, and I say that not to be a Debbie Downer, but I say that so that we can all, as trusted adults,
Mhm.
so that we can all make better decisions about that, and we can all pay a little bit more attention to what are we doing that's causing that trauma that may not show up for 10, 15, 20
Yes.
years.
We have a responsibility. And I think that I love that you say that, because that is exactly what I was thinking when you were going into that, children are resilient piece. We say that to make ourselves feel better.
Mhm.
And it really is like, I'm doing this thing. It's probably not the best for my kids, but kids are resilient.
Mhm.
The reality is, once we make the decision to have kids, our responsibilities have changed, and we really do need to put them first while they are growing up. And we always say in our work that it's our responsibility to get these adults, or get these kids, to be healthy, compassionate, strong, and alive adults.
Right.
That's what we want to see, and that's a lot of work. That is not easy. And so if someone in their life is dropping the ball, then there needs to be another safe adult that comes in and picks it up. It's
Mhm.
just got to happen that way. That is, wow. That is so good. Thank you for that. So talk to me about, just briefly, the foster care system,
Mm.
and just what's, I mean, it's clearly a broken system. There are things that we can certainly improve on, but how do we do that, and what needs to happen? And you talked about the black bag. I'm not sure everybody knows what that means. I would love
Mm.
to just hear more from you as an insider to the foster care system.
So those are a lot of
I
questions.
loaded you with a
Yeah,
ton right there. Yes.
yes, and
Let me
and
wrote them
I
down.
don't know that I have any answers, but I will do my best. So the black bag. So a lot of times, people in general, or the stereotype, or the especially if you hear foster kids telling stories, or if you read anything about a foster kid in an article or something like that, there's almost always a mention of, and I had to pack my things in a black garbage bag when I left that foster home, and I only had the clothes and whatever I could fit in that black garbage bag. And that is true. That really is true, that our homes were not true. The houses we lived in were not homes.
Right.
We only had a limited amount of property. We only had a limited amount of things that were mine,
That you could call
right?
your own.
Yes. And I can't tell you the amount of things that I lost. I lost letters, which I know, I've been married forever and ever and ever. And so it really doesn't matter now. But a lot of people have like those long love letters that they had from that first, their first significant other, and all of that. And I lost that. Um I had done some modeling when I was a teenager, and I have no pictures
Oh, wow.
because that was held against me.
Mm.
Um, I, had just things that had sentimental value,
Wow.
and they don't mean much but it was all I had. And
Yeah.
so I would lose those things and only could leave with what was in my trash bag. And a lot of times that was like clothes, so that because otherwise I would be wearing hand-me-downs from somebody else.
Yeah.
So that's what that is. As far as like the foster care system, I will say that it's absolutely broken.
Mhm.
And I will say in general terms, um, and also foster care system is doing the best that they can.
Yeah.
One of the biggest struggles that I believe, one of the biggest problems in the foster care system truly is the number of kids going into foster care versus the number of healthy,
Yeah.
nurturing adults who can provide the supports that the children need.
Right.
And that's one of the biggest things. Now I can go into a lot of reasons why, like who makes a good foster parent, who maybe doesn't. I will tell you that it is a very selfless job.
Yeah.
And it has to be, not because I want to help kids, because guess what? 90% of people out there want to help kids.
Right.
But just because you want to doesn't make you good at it, right? I want to help kids too. And yet I will not be a teacher that goes into school every single day.
Mhm.
I know what the foster care system is like. I want to help kids who are like me, and I will not become a foster parent because
Right.
it's not right for me to do that because of my own stuff. And not only is it because of my own trauma, but also because I'm not at a place in my own life and world, whether that be financially, whether that be mentally, whether that be just like right now, I'm ready to be selfish.
Right.
And
Right.
I don't have the capacity to be that selfless individual for that foster kid and whatever that means for them.
Yeah.
And so there's some of that. And like I said, I can go on and on about foster parents and like what makes healthier foster parents or where to stay away from. But the foster care system as a whole, you know, in my opinion, it really all comes down to our society.
Yeah.
And we are struggling as a society to show value in others. We are struggling as a society to make healthy decisions as far as age appropriate content, as far as the over sexualization of our society. We're really struggling with these things, and then we're thinking that kids are resilient. And so
Right.
you wrap all of that together,
Right.
and what do you have? You have a bunch of adults who have trauma because kids are resilient, and those adults with trauma are having kids, and those kids are getting kind of the family, the generational
Right.
trauma, and then the new trauma. And then we've got a whole society of people who think they want to do good, who don't fully understand what's going on.
Yeah.
And so it just is it's this constant cycle. Now I also stopped there because I realized that I said something that might be taken the wrong way. I don't mean that it's only people who have trauma that cause trauma, or
Right.
that everybody who has trauma causes trauma. I just mean that we're all broken individuals. And whether you're on the side of doing harm, intentionally or unintentionally, directly or indirectly, or you're on the side of I want to do good, but you don't really know how,
Yeah.
we're all a part of that.
Right.
And not to leave this feeling hopeless, because I don't want any of us to feel hopeless. The bottom line is we need to do better about creating a world where our kids can be safe, happy, healthy adults. We have to do our part in that. And
That is so good. That is so good. And yet that is really hard to do. It's a huge challenge. But I love that you said not everybody should be foster parents. And I think I think sometimes people feel guilt for not doing more. I want to do
Mm,
more. I want to help more. And I think that's a great desire, but we need to help where we're called. And
mhm,
I think that's really important. And not everybody is called to be a foster parent.
mhm,
And not everyone's called to be a parent at all. So
mhm,
we need to we need to do the things that we're called to do.
mhm.
So, just to switch gears a little bit, I want to talk about the great organization that you work for.
Oh, yes.
Yeah,
Have I told
weird.
you about this
Yes,
organization?
yes, absolutely. So how did you get from where you were into the counter trafficking movement? And how did, what is that? Where does that come from?
That's a great question. So I'll give you the snippet version. So I had actually had a previous career. Most of my adult life was spent in banking and insurance, and I had a whole career in that. Thought I was going to be in that for the rest of my life. I really thought that that's what I was going to retire. Was going to school for that and everything, and had really advanced within those roles pretty quickly, and I not quickly found out after a decade and a half. I figured
Quickly.
out, yeah, quickly. After 15 years or so, I figured out that the only reason I still like my job is because I kept advancing and it was a new challenge every couple of years.
Mm,
And that I wasn't really passionate about the topic itself, or I wasn't passionate about the work itself. I just needed the new change. I just needed
right.
and that's partial trauma, right? Every couple of years I had to make a change. That's part of that. But so and I was just getting a little burnout. I was feeling a little bit like, okay, I think I have greater purpose here, but I don't know what that is. And so I started working towards, I knew a few people. I started going to some meetings and coalitions, some like community meetings for child abuse prevention and things like that. And I was just trying to kind of get my feet wet and see if this is something, one, that I could handle, and two, that it's something I do want to work in, because it
Yeah.
felt like it, but I wasn't super sure. And as I got involved in some of those things, I was like, this is it. This is where I belong. And so I took an enormous pay cut, and
Going
which
from banking and insurance to nonprofit, yes,
yes, yes,
absolutely.
yes. And so I took an enormous pay cut and shot and went into social work, did some work. I spent about a year. I was actually an AmeriCorps member, and spent a year just doing some community work, serving my community, doing what I needed, trying to find my way in that, and met a lot of really good people in that, and learned a lot about what was working, what wasn't working, and kind of where I wanted to go. And I knew that I was heading the direction of foster kids. No surprise there. And so then I began working in a shelter. I was floor staff, began working in a shelter. And I will tell you, I honestly, and I don't know if Stephanie, I've ever shared this with you, but if money were no factor, if I didn't need to keep my lights on, I would be in the shelter all
Wow.
the time. It is my number one. That is where
Your heart.
yes, I will probably, when I retire, I will probably sit in the shelter for as long as they let me and hang
Wow.
out with those kids. I just, yes, it's just what I need. But um and so, not to say that I'm doing this job for the money, because that's not true. um so Stephanie takes good care of me, but we do work in nonprofit. uh but no, but then I continued to do different work, and I worked with, so I worked in shelter. I did a couple other positions at the same time, more geared specifically towards foster kids, and doing a group for foster kids of life skills and things like that. Really enjoyed that. And then someone kind of recruited me. Those were all kind of part-time jobs that filled my hours. And somebody recruited me into the world of human trafficking prevention.
Yes.
Make that very clear. Prevention of human trafficking. Recruited me into that, and I thought, let me see a little bit about this. I need to learn more about things. So, and I liked that it was full-time hours and it was more regular day hours. So I started doing this work, learned a lot about it, and it was kind of a nice combination, or a nice how do I want to say it? It was still connected, and I was still able to connect to foster youth or kids who have experienced trauma in their background, things like that. But I wasn't living in it every day, and I did feel like it was going to take its toll on me if I was with the foster kids all the time, because my heart just bled so much for these kids. And so I started doing human trafficking work, and things happened, and a whole lot of things happened. And then I was in search for a job after my program lost funding, and I knew Stephanie. And so here we are, Stephanie, here with you.
So talk to me about the Set Me Free project as if I have no idea what it is. Yolanda,
as if
what is the Set Me Free project?
So the Set Me Free project is an amazing organization that really works with prevention education on the topics surrounding human trafficking. So those topics could be anything from social media to healthy relationships, pornography, over-sexualization of our culture, all of these different topics that can go into that. We really work very, very closely with the schools is our niche. And really what we have found is our lane. We love the support of the full system of advocates, law enforcement, social workers, parents, foster, the foster program, all of these individuals, restoration. All of those things are needed. All of those things are very, very important. But we are really good in our lane. And we were really created to be unique in our approach, and with the way in which we do things, with the fun, interactive style that we have. It truly activates those critical thinking skills and maximizes the retention that our students are able to have. We know that there is some research around learning in a joyful environment actually helps you learn more and learn, retain that. And so that's a lot of what we do. Plus, it's a really heavy topic, and it's so much more digestible, especially with youth, if we don't come in pointing our finger, lecturing them, telling them fear, doing that, all of those kinds of things. If fear just doesn't work, it's short-lived. It reaches people very differently. Some people are more, can be more easily scared. Some people are less easily scared, but almost always it is short-lived. Yeah. And so we really focus a lot on that. We've got a lot of big goals in the future, and really looking forward to diving into helping with, and I don't want to share too many of our secret detail, our secret sauce details, but really looking forward to exploring more in the prevention aspect of our role. We do a lot of prevention and coming in and really working with individuals on a regular basis, whether that's students or adults, but going even deeper into that prevention aspect and getting involved in some things. So I won't share too much of that now until it's time, but wonderful organization. Yeah. That's why I'm here.
Yeah, well, and me too. I have just been very blessed to work very closely with Yolanda, and we are kind of partners in crime, good positive crime, right?
Yep.
And we
most of the time, this is pretty serious for us on this podcast right now.
Exactly.
Most of the time when people see us, they tell us we need a road show. We need to take it on the road. So yes, we'll have to do something fun on one of these podcasts.
Yes, I think that's a good idea. We do have a lot of fun together. We really do. And the work is rewarding. And I'm just really glad that I get to do life with you. I think it's awesome.
Oh, I think you're pretty phenomenal too, Stephanie. And I'm so glad. And it's not just because a raise would be nice. I'm just saying you're pretty amazing and fabulous.
Wow, thank you. I'm so glad that you said that without a raise comment. That's awesome.
Oh,
Just kidding. No, I thank you for this time. Your story always inspires me because I get to see firsthand that true resilience, and I get to see this amazing woman who does incredible work. Who, yes, you're a workaholic. That is true, but you just give so much of yourself to these kids, to our curriculum, to the organization, to your staff. And I'm so inspired by your story and who you are and who you've become. And I really am just glad to be a part of who you are. So thank you for spending time with me tonight.
aw, thank you. Absolutely.
All right. Well, I am just so glad that we had the opportunity to talk to Yolanda. Thank you for joining us. And thank you for being a part of our Being Resilient podcast. We will talk to you soon.